Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be painting up the Black Templar Castellan and Marshal. They're both pretty much the same except for some small differences, so I thought it'd be kind of pointless to make two videos, so I'll just knock them out together. And sorry I've had a slight hiatus because I was rather sick. So also I would like to point out that the Castellan has this sweet box he's held in, and the Marshal just has a regular, doesn't even have a nice box. And with Bright Touch General Purpose Gray Car Primer, I primed the models. Now I would also like to point out that the Castellan, the entire body is assembled except for the backpack and the head, because assembling that would get in the way of painting. However, for the Marshal, that one was kind of an issue. So the main body is assembled, but his right arm is not, his backpack is not, his sword is unattached, his shoulder pads are unattached. His head is unattached, his little coat d'arms shield is unattached, and on his backpack he has basically a skeleton. It's broken up into three parts, which is a golden halo, which has the hands, the back of the skeleton, and the head. And so those are also separate, because the skeleton basically is melded into the backpack, and so that'll be ridiculously hard to paint. So I'll have to have it disassembled there. You can see such a difference. The Castellan is easy to paint, the Marshal is like in a ton of pieces. Now a quick note here before I move on, I want to tell you what I was essentially thinking going into this. So my previous project was a Death Guard model, I can't remember its name right now, but basically I did really well with his armor to the point that I want to try to replicate that and see if I can keep that going. And so the Castellan has very large flat planes, and the Marshal has a bunch of segmented plates. Slightly different, but it does affect the way washes work. So my idea is to try to replicate what I did with the Death Guard model onto these guys and get the armor right. And I'm tired of painting the Black Templars the same way every time. It does get boring and repetitive. And I wanted to try to apply sort of a bluish undertone into the model. And so they're like a bluish base that you kind of will be able to see, and to experiment a bit with the armor. And now with Cantor Blue, Ulthuan Grey, and White Scar, we're going to do the pre-coating. Start off with Cantor Blue through an airbrush, and we're basically going to paint the underside, so it's going to get into all the recesses and stuff, a dark blue. Then with Ulthuan Grey Air, we're going to spray this from the top down a 45-degree angle, creating this good color gradient. And then we're going to go with White Scar, and we're going to dry brush pretty much everywhere. And then once that is done, and the models are pretty much done, so what we're going to do is then we're going to go back with White Scar and a fine brush, and we're going to paint straight lines on some places. The back of their heels, on their feet, so there are lines created from the dry brushing, but they're a little light and they need to be increased for strength. So I just apply a little bit of a quick line on certain places to add more definition to the highlight. And now with Dark Reaper and Lamian Medium, we're going to paint the armor. Now I took a gamble here. I thought that, so in the future I'm going to add like a black oil wash. And I figured that would darken it up to the point, and I still wanted this somewhat non-black thing, so there could be some coloring, highlighting, and color transition. So I went with Dark Reaper. That was incorrect. What I should have done was probably go with something darker, like an off black, maybe some Corvus black or something like that. But it should have been darker. Not a pure black, but I needed something a bit darker than Dark Reaper. But, oh well. I took a gamble, and I was wrong. It still looks good, but it was wrong. Now, so this is more of a process. I'm not going to say it's one-to-one Dark Reaper and Lamian Medium. Add a little bit of water to make it flow better, but it's sort of like you have to get the mix right. I tested it on some pieces here and there to try it. For the Castellan, it was a little too much. And then so for the Marshal, it was a little too diluted, too much Lamy and medium in it essentially, and so I had to apply 2 coats. Probably the best way is to apply 1 coat that pretty much well adjusts and covers everything, and then add a much more diluted 2nd coat that will just really flood the recesses. So now, before I move on, I want to look at this. This is the piece with, after all the undercoating, and then with the Dark Reaper mixed with Lamy medium on it. Look at this. You can see all the highlights. You can see the dry brush underneath, which makes some little scratches here and there. Looks pretty good. All the lines are highlighted. You can see all the main things. All the bolts are highlighted. So this does a lot of work very easily. This would take a long time to try to replicate, but it's smoothly done. And now let's move on to the oil wash. I'm going to make an oil wash relatively thin. It's not a sludge, it is... this is honestly a skill thing, because you have to get this right. It takes a bit of trial. I have some test pieces. I basically saved some of the sprue, spray painted them, and then use that as test pieces to see the flow and consistency, and it helps a bit. So basically I apply the black wash onto it. It's relatively light. It goes on everywhere, and then I wipe it away. It floods the recesses, and it makes a more natural shading, highlighting of color changing from the black to the dark gray to the lighter color. And it works out well. The other thing is oil washes seem to have this secondary after effect, similar to when applying like a finish or something, like a varnish or something that changes the overall look. Oil seems to do something to it that adds like this certain, I don't know, like flavor or color to it. And I like the effect. And now with Black Templars contrast, Guilliman flesh, and I don't show it, but some Lamy and medium, we're going to do some small details. Basically, there's just a bunch of hoses and cords, mostly on the Castellan. And so with pure Black Templar, I'm going to apply it onto the Castellan's hoses, and there's some cords here and there on some backpacks and stuff. And then with Guilliman flesh mixed with a little bit of Lamy and medium, because Guilliman flesh needs a little bit of help to flow better. I then apply it onto a few of the hoses to make them brown, and these, like, I don't know what these things are on his chest. I don't know what they are, but we paint them with that. Alright, now, with Karak Stone, Screaming Skull, and Pallid Witch Flesh, we are going to paint the cape. Okay, so the Marshal, the inside of his capes are white. There's a other side that's going to be red. The Castellan, I'm just going to paint them white. And so essentially what it is I'm going to start off with a layer of Karak Stone. I'm going to have to apply 2 to get a good base layer. We're not going to use the undercoating that was done on the cape. We're just going to start off with flat layers of Karak Stone. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do a 1-to-1 mix of Karak Stone and Screaming Skull. And then we're basically going to paint 95% of the entire cape with this. Only the deepest, darkest folds or recesses will have pure Karak Stone. And then we'll go with Screaming Skull. Now, we diluted it with water at first, and when I applied it, it made this, well, it made a cloth-like appearance, which was good, but I wanted smooth color. So eventually I went back with Lamy and medium mixed in, and then I just applied a few layers of this Screaming Skull over it to create a smoothness, so the cape would be smooth instead of cloth-like. I don't know, it's just like, I didn't like the look, even though technically it'd be cloth. It's Space Marine stuff, so I'd expect it to be of higher quality. And then I do a mix of Screaming Skull, not 1-to-1, but like 2 parts Screaming Skull to 1 part Pallid Witch Flesh with Lamy and medium so it flows better, and then applied it to a highlight covering around 50 to 60% of everything, and then a 1-to-1 mix of Screaming Skull, Pallid Witch Flesh, and a little bit of Lamy and medium to help it flow better onto around maybe on the highlights, the edges, the most raised areas, stuff like that. This is a little bit of a back and forth process, and it took a while of getting it done. You kind of have to create your own highlights in this case. Alright, now we're going to take burnt sienna and we're going to create a wash. We're going to thin it down a lot because on the cover boxes their cape sort of had this orangish color mixed in towards the ones near the base. So I take this, and the process is basically applying this very thinned down wash over the capes, specifically towards the bottom, wiping away the excess with a sponge, drying it out with a hair dryer rapidly. It just dries out the mineral spirits and not really the paint. And then I apply more washes back and forth, and basically I eventually get this nice transition. It takes around 3 or 4 applications to get it right, to get the color transition right. And so it's just add, remove with sponge, dry, add, remove with sponge, dry, and back and forth until I liked it. And now with Mephiston Red, Evil Sun Scarlet, Wild Rider Red, and Troll Slayer Orange, we're going to do a lot of the reds. So there's a lot of red things. There's obviously the giant cape of the Marshal, but there's also the eye lenses of the Castellan, as well as their guns, and stuff like that. And so once all the Mephiston Red is done, which took a while, we're then going to go with Evil Sun Scarlet. And this is going to take a little bit. So the Evil Sun Scarlet for the cape, mixed with a little bit of Lamy Medium to help it flow better. We're basically going to cover 80 to 90% of the entirety of the cape. We're going to be artificially making our own highlights and stuff here. We're going to pick out things to be our recesses, and we're going to stick to them. It's a little bit of a rough transition. Maybe I should have done a 1-to-1 of Mephiston and Evil Sun Scarlet first, but yeah, here we are. And then with the Evil Sun Scarlet, we continue. For the gun, we basically cover like all the face plates. We leave the recesses of these in the gun. They're like these little slits or caverns in the gun, so we leave that. As far as the lenses, we paint the upper 80% of each lens, and as far as the eye, we basically fill out the eye. The Mephiston Red is just a base coat for that. And then when we move on to Wild Rider Red, we basically paint around 70 to 80% of the entire thing, making our own highlights, mixed with a little bit of Lamy Red onto the cape. For the gun, we're basically painting the edges of each of the plates and stuff, sort of like a highlight and such. For the lenses, we're painting the upper half, and for the eye, we're trying to paint the middle half of his eye lens. Yeah. And then finally with Troll Slayer Orange, we're not really going to do anything with that except for the eye lenses. We're going to place a dot on each of the lenses. Now, one thing to note, there's apparently a candle on the back of the Castellan. We pretty much paint it the same way. One thing to note, I didn't show it here, but I came after the fact, was I took some of Evil Sun Scarlet. I took a little bit of that, I diluted it heavily with Lamy Medium, and I basically applied it as a glaze over the cape. So the thing is that the highlights and the recesses were too extreme, and it looked too much on the cape. So I applied a few thin coats of that, I didn't show it, onto the cape, and so that it basically tied the colors together. The recesses became brighter, the highlights became a little bit darker, and so it tied the cape color in better. And you'll just see the final product at a later date. And now with Corvus Black and Dark Reaper, we're going to paint this little X that the Marshal has on his chest. I also do it pretty much the same way to his shoulder pads. They have Black Templar crosses. Basically, I start off with the off-black Corvus Black as the base. Then I do a 1-to-1 mix of Corvus Black with Dark Reaper onto the folds of the cross. Then I do pure Dark Reaper. It's not that bright. I ended up keeping it for the cross on the chest. I mean, you can subtly see the colors, so it's there if you look, but it's not super bright and picked out. But as far as shoulder pads, the only thing I do different is I take some Dawnstone, mix it in with Dark Reaper, and highlight a little bit from there. I don't show that. I do that at a later time. So we're just going to knock out a small detail. With Ulthuan Grey, the only good one, air version, and Pallid Witch Flesh, we're going to do the shoulder pads. The white of the shoulder pads is basically just going to be Ulthuan Grey, and then Pallid Witch Flesh covering about 90% of it. And now with Karak Stone, Screaming Skull, Skeleton Horde Contrast, and Lamian Medium, we're going to be painting the skulls on the Castellan shoulders. So we're going to start off with a base layer of Karak Stone mixed with Lamian Medium, and this is going to pick out the natural undercoating that we've done. The blue is going to show through a little bit, and so there's going to be already shading and highlighting. Then we're going to take Skeleton Horde Contrast, mix 1-to-1 with Lamian Medium, and apply it all over, add some extra depth. Then we're going to go back with Karak Stone, mixed with a little bit of Lamian Medium to make it flow better and spread better, and we're basically going to highlight it. We're basically going to paint around half of the skull with this, mostly the edges, and which there are a lot of. And then we're going to go with Screaming Skull, mixed with a little bit of Lamian Medium to make it flow better, just like with Karak Stone, and then we're just going to apply it probably to like 15%, maybe 25% of the skulls, just highlighting the most prominent raised lines and edges. And now with Karak Stone, Screaming Skull, and Black Templar Contrast, and also not featured Lamian Medium, we're going to take Karak Stone and we're going to apply it in the middle of our shield thing, just to add some color into there. And then with Screaming Skull, with a little bit of Lamian Medium, we're going to apply it into the middle of that. Then we're going to take pure Black Templar's Contrast paint, and we're going to do our very best to paint a line without screwing it up. Very fine brush. And we're just basically going to make a sword cross thing. I use contrast paint for this very fine work because it flows very well off the brush. Moving on to the head, with Kislev Flesh, Seraph Sepia, and Lamian Medium, we're going to paint the head. I chose Kislev Flesh, but looking back I probably should have gone with a different color, maybe Cadian Flesh Tone. It's just it was a little bit too yellow. It never looks like that until like afterwards, but... So basically it was just Kislev Flesh, Seraph Sepia mixed in with a little bit of Lamian Medium to help it flow better. Apply that all over for the recesses, then did Kislev Flesh mixed with a little bit of Lamian Medium to help it flow better. Apply it on the highlight, and I did this like once or twice till it had a nice shading and nice highlights. And then with Black Templar's Contrast in Ulthuan Grey Air, we're going to paint the teeth and some of the depth. So with Black Templar's Contrast, we're going to apply this first to fill out his mouth. It'll flow into the depth easily. Then with Ulthuan Grey, we'll paint his eyes, the eyeballs, and his teeth. And now with a 0.25mm micron pen, we're going to paint his eyes. I cannot actually show this because I have to have this very close up. Basically, I just apply taps on his eyes and spin the pen around a little bit and creates the pupils. And now with AK Interactive Ultra Matte Varnish, we're basically going to paint everything that we have painted with this to seal it in and also to create a nice effect and also to protect it. This models, or mostly the Marshal, is such a mess in order that I'm basically going to have to use this multiple times after the fact, after doing metals and after doing a bunch of stuff, just because of the way things are built. Alright, with Runefang Steel Air, the only good version of this paint, Carbon Black, Liquitex ink, and Gloss Varnish, we're going to create a mix. Now, basically I add not even a full drop of the Carbon Black into the Runefang Steel. There's like 2 or 3 brushes worth of Runefang Steel, a little bit of Carbon Black added till it becomes darker, and then I add a Gloss Varnish in it so that it shines, the metal will shine better, and also holds it better. Now, this is sort of a skill and a process. So I use this to cover basically all the base metal parts, the dark metal. However, I didn't add enough water to it. If you add enough water, it can fall around the objects and basically allow the highlights and the undercoating to shine through. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough water with this, and most of the Castellan's metal doesn't really have nice highlights with the metal. It's sad, but then I fix this by going on adding water to it, and so some of the metal is fine, and then I just go back with pure Runefang Steel afterwards and use that as a highlight for a lot of the chains and metal plates and stuff like that. Now we're doing the same mix again, except this time with transparent burnt sienna. Now one thing to note is that I'm going to have to apply around 2 coats of this, and this is basically to paint the gold. So the gold around the area, I'm going to use this. And now I'm doing the same mix again, but now with transparent raw sienna. This was supposed to create a much lighter, I was going for like a burnished metal, but it turns out to be green, and so the trimmings are starting to turn green. So then I mix this and the previous mix with the burnt sienna together to make a lighter, burnished, somewhat greenish, but goldenish color, and I use this for all the trimmings. I have to use around 2 coats though. Alright, with Runefang Steel Air, the only good one, Drakenhof Nightshade, and Lamian Maiden, we're going to paint the power sword that the Marshal has. This is an experiment. So I already started off painting the entire thing with Runefang Steel, flat base, and I already did 1 wash of Drakenhof Nightshade and Lamian Maiden in it, mixed around 1 to 1, and then rapidly dried with a hair dryer. And then basically what we're going to do is, up half the length of the blade, we're going to paint with a layer of Drakenhof Nightshade, and we're going to do multiple layers with less on the blade each time, going up one side and the other side going down, and so like it goes from light to dark and dark to light, and we do this basically on each of the 4 faces of the blade, and then we just dry it off with a hair dryer to make it rapidly go, and it creates this kind of rough, it's not perfectly smooth, not by a long shot, it's like it gets darker in patches. It sort of looks okay, and then I do Runefang Steel Air onto the edges of the blade and the center line of the blade, and it comes out okay. After the fact, I apply a gloss varnish onto it to make it shine, but And now with super glue we begin a partial assembly. Basically the Castellan head, no, not the Castellan head, the Marshal's head and backpack is still separate and the Marshal's not on his base. The Castellan we can just completely assemble now. And now with Lamian Medium, Carrick Stone, Screaming Skull, and Skeleton Horde Contrast, we're going to paint the skeleton that's on the back of the Marshal. Now, I make a mix of sort of 1-to-1-ish of Lamian Medium, Carrick Stone, basically the wash that I keep doing, and then I apply it to the bottom skeleton, the chest of the skeleton. Basically, I want to paint this part up a little bit first, and then once it's dry enough, I'm going to start beginning to assemble the skeleton together, and then I'll assemble the head after the fact. And then I just wanted the underside painted with that color so that I could easily get through. And then once that was done, I then went back and painted the whole skeleton with Carrick Stone. I then applied a 1-to-1 mix of Skeleton Horde Contrast and Lamian Medium onto the entirety of the skeleton to add the depth. Then I highlighted with Carrick Stone, diluted a little bit with Lamian Medium to have it flow better, and then I did a finer highlight with Screaming Skull, and then that did well with the model. This one was quite a puzzle to put together and without screwing things up or getting in the way of the other stuff. That's why it's kind of a mess to assemble this model. And now with Iron Hand Steel, and I actually do not use Iron Breaker. It was good enough. Basically I take Iron Hand Steel and I apply this to all the metal rivets, spines and stuff that's on the skeleton of the Marshal. Then I go to the Castellan and I paint all the metal ball bearings that are on his armor. Yeah. And now with Burnt Sienna, not Magenta, I decided not to use it, Black, and Burnt Umber, we're going to do some final finishing washes. So with Burnt Sienna and a fine wash, we're going to apply this to all the skulls that are on the Castellan, along his shoulder pads and his belt. And then we'll immediately wipe the stuff away. And we'll apply a little bit of that Burnt Sienna stuff onto his axe, here and there, and just add a little bit, wipe a little bit, add a little bit, wipe a little bit. It's mostly just an art thing at this point. There's no real method. It's more like add till it looks good, take away if it's too much. Then with the black color, we're going to apply splotches onto his axe in random spots, and then we're going to tap, tap, tap with a sponge, and it's going to slowly spread it or remove it, and then add these random patches of darkness on the metal. It looks fine, I guess. His axe is not, in the end, not the best. Oh well. Then with Burnt Umber, we're going to apply this onto the metal pieces on the skeleton, and as well as that, I don't know what that is, that halo thingy on the Marshal. Then we're just going to wipe it away. And we're just adding final details and stuff, as well as far as the head, the Castellan's head, I apply the Burnt Sienna in some places to add some more shadows towards his eyes, the black to add like stubble onto his face, add the black, and then remove it with a sponge. Create some stubble, some nice little colors, and a few details I do not show. I basically add more ultramatte varnish on certain places. I add gloss varnish onto the power weapon blades, both their weapons, and small little insignificant details here and there just to tie everything up. And done. The bases were done in the same way as the previous bunch of Black Templar commissions that I've been doing. I just thought, yeah, you know what, might as well go with it. It fits. And so, well, here they are. It's a mixed bag, I will say. So let's start off with all the good stuff that worked really, really well. So first off, his armor plates, or their armor plates. The technique worked really, really well. So the Castellan has flat armor plates, but the coloring is smooth, and you can still see the transition of light to dark and all that stuff. So that technique worked really well with him. And with the Marshal's segmented armor plates, it looked real well. You can see all the highlighting, the shading, color transition, all that stuff. The armor plates look really, really good as a part of the model, not just something to fall into the backdrop. It looks really, really good. The white part of the capes, they look very good, especially with the orangish coloration added in. Adds some good flavor, works really well. The metals, they're fine. I mean, the gold and brass, it looks good. Now, things that they're not great, but they just hold in. So the sword of the Marshal, it looks pretty good. It looks messy, but like it's okay. The skeleton on the back of the Marshal is okay. I mean, well, the technique brought out all the highlights and stuff, so it's very well highlighted and shaded. But it doesn't have any greatly bright highlights, so it doesn't stick out. It just blends in. But when you look at it, you can see it. The Castellan's shoulder pads, they're pretty well done. The skulls are nice. The skulls are not. The middle skulls are nice. Their guns they blend into the background. Their swords blend to the background. The red of the cape of the Marshal is okay. His shoulder pads blend in. They're okay. I guess the only thing is the Marshal's face, as far as I can tell, is like, it's not that it's bad, but everything else looks so great in comparison that it sticks out like a sore thumb. I don't know, faces are just so hard for me to get right. Just all the individual details, character, and colorization in them. And also them being so incredibly small. Really hard to get the fine details right. Overall, well, down to rating. Now, starting with the Castellan, I'm going to have to say probably, I want to say 7 out of 10, but that's too rough. I'll say just barely an 8. I mean, the armor plates look great, but his axe like sticks out poorly compared to the rest, and he's kind of flat. Like, well, as a model, I mean, I'm rating my paint job. I mean, he doesn't look as dynamic, but I'd say an 8 out of 10. His helmet looks a little meh, and his axe looks a little meh. As far as the Marshal, an easy 8. Borderline on a 9. It's like, I really love how the armor turned out. It is its own feature instead of all of its little bits and stuff, but some things hold him back. It would have been a 9, but his head, his little fleur-de-lis shield, I guess the paint is just not as smooth as the rest, so it kind of holds it back. Yeah, overall, 1 barely, almost a 9, but is an 8. 1 mostly a 7, but just barely making it to an 8, so around there. But overall, the technique I tried worked very well with the armor. It doesn't take that long. It's relatively simple to do. It's just going a little bit back and forth with washes and stuff and getting things right. Well, yeah, it looks great, the model as well. Well, that was a good fun project, getting back into the swing of things. Alright, to eBay with you all. So, like the video if you like the video, share it if you want to share it, comment if you want to comment, or have anything you want to nitpick or praise, whichever. Like it if you like it, dislike it if you dislike it, and I'll see you hopefully sooner than the last one. Bye.